Hello everyone, welcome back to my B&B Today spoiler channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Electra had spent most of the afternoon in the Forrester Creations design studio, setting a run of rose-cut diamonds that Ridge had only approved that morning. By the time she set down her pencil and rolled the stiffness from her shoulders, the light from the high windows had faded from bright midday white to a softer gold RJ had left an hour earlier, murmuring something about needing quiet to work on a silhouette he wasn't ready to show anyone. He'd asked her to look over the jewelry overlays before Monica, and she'd smiled at the secrecy in his voice on her way out. That smile felt very far away now. He'd borrowed a folder of fabric samples 2 days ago, and she needed it back. The jewelry line couldn't move forward until the metals matched the exact tones of the new silk and jersey. His private office was a short walk down the hall, a cramped, cluttered room he'd claimed for himself since coming back to the company, stocked with mood boards, half-finished sketches, and a small forest of abandoned coffee cups she knocked once out of habit. No answer. She tried the handle. It turned easily. The room smelled of cedar and the faint metallic tang of fabric shears. Late sun slanted across the drafting table, catching a single unfinished sketch. She stepped inside, meaning only to grab the swatches from the shelf by the window. That was when she saw it. A full-size dress form stood in the far corner, half hidden behind a rolling rack of sample garments. It wasn't the industrial kind every workroom kept a few of. This one had been altered by hand, the torso padded to exact measurements, the neck narrowed, a wig of long black hair fixed to the head in the same loose waves Electra wore most days. The face had been painted with real care, the arch of the brows, the shape of the mouth, the particular angle of the cheekbones. The resemblance was unmistakable. Electra went still. She stood there a long moment, just looking. The form was dressed in an unfinished ivory silk gown, the skirt still gaping open at one seam, the bodice pinned in a shape she recognized, one of her own early sketches. A length of matching silk had been draped loosely over one shoulder, as if someone had been interrupted mid-drape. On the small table beside it sat an open jewelry box, 2 nearly identical pendants, one in silver and one in gold, each set with a single clear stone resting on black velvet. She'd finished that design only the week before. Her first thought was that this was some kind of joke. Her second thought, colder than the first, was that the proportions were too exact to be a coincidence. She'd stood for fittings in the sample room only a few days ago. Someone had taken those numbers and applied them here with precision. She made herself move closer. The painted eyes seemed to track her. Up close, the likeness was worse. The set of the jaw, the small lift at the outer corners of the eyes, the way the hair had been arranged to fall exactly as hers did on the nights she forgot to pin it back. A slim gold chain hung at the mannequin's collarbone, nearly identical to the one she wore every day. She reached out and touched the gown. The silk was cool. The pins were still sharp. On the floor near the base of the form lay a slip of paper, her name at the top in RJ's unmistakable handwriting. A column of measurements beneath it, and a note about the drape of a sleeve. Her heart climbed into her throat. She stepped back until her shoulders met the edge of the drafting table. A moment ago this room had simply been private. Now it felt sealed. She thought of the past few weeks, the late nights comparing sketches, the way he watched her when he thought she was absorbed in her work, the compliments that always hovered just short of something more. She'd told herself it was ordinary, the kind of attention any colleague might pay another who happened to share a surname and an ambition. The one unplanned kiss between them, she'd told herself, was a mistake they'd both silently agreed to forget. The mannequin suggested otherwise. Footsteps sounded in the hallway. Before she could decide whether to leave or stay and confront him, the door opened. RJ came in with a roll of patterned paper under one arm and stopped the instant he saw her standing in the middle of the room, the dress form in plain view behind her. Neither of them spoke. He set the paper down slowly and shut the door. Electra, her name came out quieter than usual. His eyes moved from her face to the form and back. Whatever explanation he'd rehearsed, it was too late for it now. "What is this?" she asked. She kept her voice level by sheer will. He ran a hand through his hair. "It's a dress form," he said, not bothering to deny the rest. "It has my face on it. I use it for draping." He crossed the room and stopped a few feet away, looking at the mannequin as if seeing it for the first time himself. "I started with the measurements from the sample room fitting. After that I just kept adjusting it until it looked right, until it looked like you." "Why?" He let out a long breath. "Because I kept seeing you in everything I tried to design for this collection. The way you stand when you're thinking. The way the light catches your hair when you're hunched over a sketch. I told myself I was just finding the right proportions for the line. I wasn't. It was you. It was always you, so you built a copy of me," she said, "and dressed it in the clothes you wanted me to wear. Is there a kinder way to put it? It sounds worse the way you put it." He had no answer for that. The room went quiet except for the wall clock and the slow drift of evening traffic outside. Electra turned back to the mannequin, the careful placement of the chain, the precise pins. The way the silk had been arranged to suggest movement even though the figure never moved at all. "RJ, this isn't inspiration. This is obsession. I know how it looks. I've watched this happen in this family before. A mannequin built for someone he couldn't let go of. It didn't end well for anyone." His jaw tightened. "I'm not Thomas, then tell me why I'm standing in your office looking at a replica of myself, because every time I try to tell you how I feel, you change the subject. You bring up Will. You bring up the line. You'll talk about anything except the fact that there's something between us. I thought if I could just outcapture the way I see you, I could get it out of my system and actually work, and did it." He looked at the form, then at her. "No." The single word landed harder than any explanation could have. She'd felt the current between them for weeks. Late in the studio, when the only light left was over the cutting table, and told herself it was nothing but a natural response to everything falling apart with Will, the mannequin made that story impossible to keep believing. This hadn't been idle curiosity. He had been measuring her, studying her, remaking her in private so that some version of her would be there even when she wasn't. She walked to the small table and opened the jewelry box again. "The two pendants caught the light. I made these the night after I left here," she said. "They're mine. I made copies of my own work," she went on, "and you put them on a copy of me." "Yes." His honesty was almost worse than a lie would have been. "I wanted to see how they'd sit against the neckline." She closed the box. "I have to go, don't." He didn't move toward her, kept his hands at his sides, as if to prove he meant her no harm. It was the same open, unguarded look he'd had the night he kissed her. "I know this is a lot," he said. "I know it's too much. But I'm not going to pretend I don't feel what I feel. You're the first person who's walked into this building and made me want to build something that actually means something. Not for the company, not for my father. For you. When I couldn't have you in the room, I used the form so I could keep working. It was never supposed to be found. But it was." Electra pressed her fingertips to her temples. "And now I know." The room felt smaller than it had a minute ago. She thought of Will, the careful way he'd held her after their last argument, the promises they kept making and breaking and trying to make again, and how, without quite noticing, she'd let RJ fill in the spaces Will had left empty. She'd told herself she was simply clearing her head. The mannequin told her she'd never been the only one who was confused. "I need you to take it apart," she said finally. Ray J's brow furrowed. "What?" The mannequin. "Disassemble it. Pack it up. I don't care what happens to it after that." He was quiet for a moment. "I understand," he said, "but I don't know how I walk into this office every day knowing there's a copy of you sitting in the corner. Then that's what you need to do." "All right." He gave a single nod and stepped past her to begin. He lifted the mannequin's arm and eased the ivory silk from its shoulders with a kind of care that surprised her, folding the fabric, setting it aside before he pulled protective wrap and a shipping box from the closet. He worked through it methodically, taking the shape apart piece by piece, wrapping each one, covering the painted face last. Before the glass eyes could catch the ceiling light again, Electra stayed where she was, arms crossed, watching. Part of her wanted to walk out and never think about the room again. Another part of her couldn't look away when the final piece went into the box. He sealed it with a strip of tape, the last sound in the room for a long moment. "It's done," he said. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Thank you." Outside, the boulevard lights had started to come up against the fading sky. RJ spoke first.